The events you're about to see are based on real accounts. To protect the identities of those involved, names and details have been changed. My name is Nathan. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a small town in rural North Carolina. What I'm about to tell you happened a few years ago, but it still haunts me. I was never the kind of person who believed in these things. I've always been rational, grounded. If someone had told me this story, I probably would have laughed and thought they were exaggerating or imagining things. But ever since that night, my perspective on what is real and what isn't has completely changed. To this day, I try to understand what happened to me, but every time I remember, it feels like something beyond my comprehension. At the time, I was living alone in a cabin I inherited from my grandfather, near a lake surrounded by a dense forest. I always thought the idea of living there was peaceful and isolated, perfect for someone wanting to escape the rush of the city. The house was old, full of dark wooden furniture, with those floors that creak with every step. During the day, the place was beautiful, almost idyllic, but at night, the surrounding forest turned into an absolute void of darkness. There were no streetlights nearby, and the only sounds were the wind and the animals. I had always liked the solitude. I felt relaxed there. At least until that night. I had experienced sleep paralysis before. For those who haven't, it's one of the worst sensations imaginable. You wake up, you're conscious, but you can't move. Your body is completely frozen, as if you're trapped inside it. And sometimes there are hallucinations, shadows, figures, whispers. People always told me it was just the brain playing tricks, that it was harmless. So when I woke up that night, feeling that weight on my chest, I thought it was just another episode. The room was dark, with only a sliver of moonlight slipping through the partially closed curtain. The silence was absolute, but something felt off. I could sense a presence, something difficult to describe. My eyes darted around the darkness, searching for anything unusual. My heart was pounding. I had the overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, out of nowhere, my body started responding. Slowly, I was able to move my fingers, then my arms, until I could sit up in bed. But the fear was still there. The room felt colder than before, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. A chill ran down my spine. My first instinct was to look at the window, and I wish I hadn't. Outside, near the lake, there was a gnarled tree that had always been there since I moved in. During the day, it was nothing special, but at night, under the pale moonlight, it looked like a twisted silhouette against the sky. But the problem wasn't the tree. The problem was what was sitting beneath it, an old woman. She was there, motionless. Her hair was long and disheveled, draping over her shoulders like it was dry and tangled. She wore a dark, stained dress that looked as old as she was. But the worst part was her face. It was wrinkled in an unnatural way, as if her skin was collapsing inward. Her eyes were sunken, completely black, and they seemed empty. I can't explain it, but looking at her filled me with a terror I had never felt before. It was like something inside me was twisting. I tried to convince myself that it was just a remnant of the sleep paralysis. Maybe my mind was still dreaming, deceiving me. But then she moved. Slowly, she turned her head toward me. I have never felt such fear in my life. Every hair on my body stood on end, and an unbearable cold spread through me, a cold that came from within. My stomach churned instantly. The sensation was as if she was pulling me, tearing something out of me. My arms tingled, a buzzing filled my ears, and at that moment, I swear I felt my soul being ripped away. I knew that if I kept looking at her, I would never come back. Panic took over, and all I could do was squeeze my eyes shut. My head was spinning. My body felt like it was being sucked out of something. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It was as if I was being dragged into an invisible abyss, an endless darkness. The silence was deafening, but at the same time I could feel a suffocating presence, something around me, watching, waiting. Then suddenly everything stopped. The sounds returned, the wind outside, the creaking of the wooden floor, my own ragged breathing. I opened my eyes. I was lying in bed again. The room looked the same as always, the moonlight still filtering through the curtain. My heart was pounding against my ribs. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. But then, my eyes drifted to the window again. The curtain was open. I can't explain what happened that night. I never saw that woman again, but since then, I avoid looking at that tree at night. Several friends have stayed over, and some have said they felt something strange near the lake. A bad feeling, like someone was there watching. I've thought about moving, but something keeps me tied to this place. Maybe it's my grandfather's house, or maybe it's the fear that if I leave, that thing will come after me. Sometimes when the wind blows hard, I feel a chill down my spine, like something is there, like she's waiting. My name is Eve. I'm 26 years old and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I've never been the type to scare easily. I always liked horror stories but never took them seriously. My older brother loved scaring me when we were kids, telling stories about spirits and strange creatures, but I always laughed at the end. I thought it was all just made-up nonsense. But 2 years ago, something happened to me. Something I can't forget. I tried to tell myself it was just a nightmare, that my mind played a trick on me, but deep down, I know it wasn't. Because even today, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I have the feeling that it's still there, watching me. It was just a normal night. At the time, I lived alone in a small apartment on the second floor of an old building. It wasn't one of those haunted places you see in horror movies. It was just an old apartment with thin walls and noisy pipes. I had recently moved in and didn't know my neighbors well, but the place was quiet. That day, I got home from work around 8, had a quick snack, and spent some time on my phone before going to sleep. Nothing unusual. Around 11, I got into bed and turned off the light. I didn't have any nightmares. I didn't wake up startled in the middle of the night. What happened was immediate. I opened my eyes suddenly, not knowing why. My body felt strange, heavy, as if I was stuck between sleep and wakefulness. The darkness in the room wasn't complete. A bit of light from the street came through the gaps in the curtain, giving everything a faint greenish hue. I was lying on my side facing the wall, but I felt something, a discomfort, a presence. With great effort, I turned to the other side, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, near the door, there was a figure standing still. It was tall, extremely tall, taller than any person I had ever seen. At first, my brain tried to find a logical explanation. I thought it was a weird shadow, maybe a reflection from the window. But then, it moved. The figure's head began to expand and contract, like it was breathing in a completely wrong way. I don't know how else to explain it. It wasn't natural. I tried to focus my vision, but it was like my eyes couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. It was like looking directly at something that shouldn't exist. And before I could react, the thing started pounding on its own chest. The sound was dull, muffled. With each hit, its body leaned forward a little. I wanted to scream, but my throat was locked. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like I was completely vulnerable, exposed, and the only thing I could do was watch as it got closer. Every step felt like a tremor. It came toward me slowly, hitting its chest harder. When it reached the bed, it bent down, and that's when I saw its face, or rather, the lack of one. There were no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just smooth, stretched skin that glowed in the dim light. By this point, my heart was racing so fast I thought it would explode inside my chest, and that's when I felt its hands on my neck. It was as if sharp nails were scratching my skin before even touching me. The pressure increased too fast. I tried to move, tried to gasp for air, but nothing happened. My hands wouldn't move. My eyes filled with tears from the panic. I couldn't even swallow. Everything inside me was screaming to fight, but it was like my body had shut down. So, with nothing else to do, I closed my eyes. I just wanted it to be over. Time seemed to stop. The room went silent again. The feeling of suffocation gradually faded, but I still didn't have the courage to open my eyes. When I finally managed to move, I slowly opened my eyes and sat up in bed, shaking from head to toe. My first instinct was to turn on the light. The room was empty, the door still locked, the windows closed, nothing out of place, but my throat was burning. I got up with difficulty and went to the bathroom. I turned on the light, looked at myself in the mirror, and saw the red marks on my neck. Finger marks. After that night, my life was never the same. I went a week without being able to sleep properly. I spent my nights awake, leaving all the lights on. Every shadow on the wall made me hold my breath. I felt like it could come back at any moment. I tried telling a few people, but no one took me seriously. They said it was sleep paralysis, but it wasn't. I know it wasn't. I moved out of that apartment a few months later. I wanted to believe it was behind me, but sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up with the feeling that someone is in my room, that something is watching me in the dark. I never look at the corner of my bedroom, never. And maybe the worst part is that every now and then when I'm distracted, I hear that sound again, that muffled sound of something pounding on its own chest. And I don't know what to do. My name is Jasper. I am 38 years old and I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. What I am about to tell happened in 2004 when I was 19, but it still haunts me to this day. I was never the type to believe in supernatural things. I always thought that stories of apparitions and ghosts were just the product of people's imagination, those who wanted attention or watched too many horror movies. But after that night, I could never fully doubt again. At the time, I lived alone in a small apartment on the second floor of an old building. The place was simple but comfortable enough for a young man just starting out in life. I worked late at a bar downtown and got home around 2 in the morning almost every day. It was my routine. I would take a quick shower, eat whatever was available, and go straight to bed. That night was no different. I remember feeling more tired than usual. The bar had been busy, and I barely had time to breathe during my shift. As soon as I lay down in bed, I passed out. I don't remember dreaming about anything. It was one of those deep sleeps where it feels like your body completely shuts down. But at some point during the night, I suddenly woke up with a strange feeling, like there was someone else in the room with me. My room was small. The only window was on the opposite side of the bed, and the bathroom door was to my left. I slept facing the bedroom door, which was slightly open that night, but the hallway light was off. That's when I saw her. In the corner of the room, near the dresser, stood a girl. She had her back turned to me, with her face slightly turned to the side as if she were waiting for something. I couldn't see her face clearly, but her dark hair fell over her shoulders, messy and unkempt. She wore a thin, yellowed nightgown, like the old-fashioned ones grandmothers used to wear. My heart pounded, but my body wouldn't move. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt trapped in my throat. My arms and legs were heavy as if they were nailed to the mattress. Then everything happened too fast. Without warning, the girl turned toward me and let out a piercing, high-pitched scream like she was being stabbed. I wanted to run, scream, do anything, but I couldn't. My body simply wouldn't obey. She rushed at me, and in the next second, I felt her weight on my chest. Her small but incredibly strong hands grabbed my throat and started to squeeze. My heart felt like it was going to explode. My eyes were wide open, trying to process what was happening. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my face, but I couldn't clearly make out her features. It was all distorted, as if my brain refused to register it. The worst part was the pressure on my throat. It was real. I was suffocating. Every part of me screamed to fight back, but my body remained frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I don't know how long it lasted. It might have been seconds, maybe minutes, but it felt like the longest time of my life. My lungs begged for air, my vision started to darken, and I was already accepting that this was the end when, out of nowhere, she disappeared. She simply vanished. Suddenly I could move again. I rolled to the side of the bed, gasping so hard that my throat hurt. My chest rose and fell rapidly as I tried to catch my breath. I sat up in bed, still in shock, feeling the burning sensation around my neck. I ran to turn on the light and looked around the room. Nothing. The door was still slightly open, just as before. The window was closed. Everything looked exactly as it had when I went to sleep. I got up and went straight to the bathroom. When I looked at myself in the mirror, a shiver ran down my spine. There were red marks on my neck, finger marks. I wanted to believe it had just been a dream, but this was physical, real. I stood there, staring at my reflection, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. I had heard about it before, but had never experienced anything like this. Even if it was, how could I explain the marks on my neck? How could I explain the very real feeling of those hands choking me? I spent the rest of the night awake, trembling, trying to understand what had happened. When the sun finally rose, I left my apartment and wandered around the city, just to avoid going back there. I stopped at a cafe and sat there for hours, just watching people walk by, trying to convince myself that it had been just a vivid nightmare. I spent a few nights sleeping on my friend's couch, making up excuses to avoid returning. I told him I had been having strange nightmares but didn't go into detail. I didn't want to sound crazy. When I finally gathered the courage to sleep there again, nothing happened. The apartment was silent, no sign of the girl, but I never felt truly alone in that place again. For weeks I researched the building, trying to find any record of a death, any macabre story, but I found nothing. The building was old, but there were no reports of tragedies or strange events. I discreetly asked my neighbors, but no one mentioned anything unusual. That made it even more disturbing. If there had been some explanation, some story behind it, maybe it would make sense. But it was as if it had only happened to me. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I never saw that girl again, never heard of any strange stories about the building, but the marks on my neck took days to disappear, and the sound of that scream still echoes in my head, even years later. Some nights, when I'm alone and everything is silent, I swear I can still feel a slight pressure on my throat, as if something is watching me, waiting for the right moment to return. My name is Ilo, I'm 34 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I've never been into paranormal stuff, always thought that the mind can play tricks on you when you're tired or stressed. But something happened to me a few years ago, and to this day, I can't forget it. I don't know how to explain it, I don't know what it was, I just know it was real. It was just a normal night. I was living alone in a small apartment downtown, close to my job. It was a simple studio, but cozy, the kind where the bed is in the same space as the living room. I remember that day had been particularly exhausting. One of those long work days where everything goes wrong. I just wanted to get home, take a shower, and sleep. And that's exactly what I did. I lay in bed, scrolled through my phone for a few minutes, and then passed out. I woke up suddenly, for no apparent reason. The first thing I noticed was that my body was completely still. It wasn't like when you wake up groggy and don't want to get out of bed. It was different, like I was trapped inside myself. My brain was working. I could see and hear everything around me, but I couldn't move a single muscle. My heart started racing instantly. I tried to move my fingers, turn my head, blink faster. Nothing happened. The room looked normal. I could see the streetlight filtering through the curtains, hear the distant sound of cars passing by. The only thing strange was the silence inside the apartment, an absolute silence that felt wrong. It was like the air itself had gotten heavier, pressing me into the mattress. And then, I felt it. At first it was just a weight on the bed, like someone had sat next to me. My heart nearly stopped. I lived alone. There was no one there. Fear took over me in a way I had never felt before. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air wasn't coming in properly. That's when the weight started to move. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. Something was slowly crawling toward me on the mattress. A chill ran down my spine. The pressure on my chest grew stronger, and suddenly I realized I was struggling to breathe. It was like something invisible was crushing me. I couldn't get enough air, like someone had placed a huge weight on my torso. My entire body started tingling and sheer panic set in. I tried to process what was happening, but my mind was in full panic mode. My eyes were wide open, scanning the room for any explanation, but everything seemed normal. The curtains still moved slightly with the wind, the furniture was in the same place. The only thing wrong was that terrible sensation. And then, I heard it. A whisper. Low, almost imperceptible, like someone speaking right next to my ear, but at the same time too far away to understand. It was hoarse, dragged out, like it was testing the words, savoring my fear. I didn't recognize the language, but I didn't need to. The intent was clear. It wanted me to know it was there. I wanted to close my eyes, pretend nothing was happening, but the fear kept me trapped in the darkness of my own room. The ringing in my ears grew louder, and then I felt something even worse. A slight pressure on my neck. At first it was barely noticeable, like a light touch, but then it got stronger. At this point, the terror was so overwhelming that I felt like I was going to pass out. My lungs burned from the lack of air, my chest was rising and falling rapidly. desperate to breathe. The sensation of being suffocated became unbearable, and at that moment, something inside me snapped. I started fighting with everything I had. Inside my mind, I was screaming, begging to move. My vision blurred, and then, suddenly, everything broke. It was like an invisible string had been cut. My whole body came back to life at once, and I sat up so fast that I almost fell forward. The weight was gone. The room looked exactly the same. No one was there. But I knew with every fibre of my being that it hadn't been a dream. I could feel it on my skin. The room still felt tainted with something, like the presence had just left. I sat there for a while, trying to understand what had just happened. I turned on the lamp, looked around, but nothing seemed out of place. Even so, my heart kept pounding. My arms and legs were shaking like I had just run a marathon. I grabbed my phone and went straight to the internet. I searched everything about sleep paralysis, trying to convince myself that it was just that. The descriptions were similar. Many people talked about a presence, a shadow, the feeling of being watched. But nothing explained the physical sensation. The real weight, the touch on my neck. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed sitting on my bed with all the lights on, waiting for the sun to rise. Every shadow seemed to move, every tiny noise made me hold my breath. The feeling that something had been there watching me never went away. In the following days, I tried to go back to my normal life, but one thing changed forever. I never sleep on my back again. Because deep down, I'm afraid that if I do, it will come back. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like to support the community. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new content. See you next time.